This video is slightly different to my usual videos. Normally my videos are specifically aimed at my own transition and then providing information for other people to transition. But another important part of being transgender, I feel, is educating other people. Not only other transgender people, but the cisgender people that surround them. So the people you come across in daily lives and the people that are in your own family that are willing to listen. Obviously you can't educate people who have no interest in learning, and that's why they will remain ignorant and will always be a problem for us. But for those that give you the opportunity to educate, I feel you should at least try. I had the opportunity recently after a minor transphobic incident to educate one of the group alone later on, and I did try my best to educate them and give them a view on what it's like to be transgender, our world, and why their preference towards a certain standard of visual cue wasn't really acceptable. What opportunities you get and what information you can pass on is largely due to the time that you're given. I was lucky with this individual that I'm speaking about before, because I had a good 50 minutes to explain everything to them, and we had quite a long chat after the other members of the group left. However, the opportunity to talk for someone that long doesn't often come up, and also if you are willing to educate others, then I think it's only fair that you apply a set of rules that you're comfortable with. I don't remember where I initially heard this, but there's 3 rules I tend to stick to or pass on to people that are willing to engage and try and learn, and I ask them to pass on the same rules to others so they might better interact with the next transgender person they meet. The rules usually are that 1, if you do meet a transgender person, you shouldn't be asking about their previous name or who they were and what they did before and everything else, because that just shows that you're more interested in the person they were and getting the gossip and the dirt rather than who they are and who they're trying to present to the world now as their true self. Number 2 is usually I tell people not to make questions about surgery and things like that personal. I don't mind answering questions about surgery and what surgeries are available, what treatments are available for us, etc. But that's it, that's on a us basis. If you're willing to answer questions, that's great, but I actually feel as a standard we should probably encourage that people ask what surgeries are available, what the processes are for those surgeries, not the usual questions which we get, which is what have you had, what do you want, which are obviously far more personal than is needed. And chances are, if you're anything like me, they'll get the answer they were kind of looking for in a roundabout way anyway, because you'll use yourself as the example. I quite often, when I'm asked about medications or hair removal or anything like that, I talk about my experiences that are personal to me, and that really is the best way to deal with it if you have questions for a transgender person. And thirdly is about the language you use. Just try and respect transgender people by using the correct terminologies, such as the correct pronouns and their name and things like that. Lastly, when you're trying to educate people, make sure it's safe to do so. Don't feel like you have to correct a large group of people or approach any one individual who seems to be being particularly aggressive towards yourself or any other LGBT member of the community. Make sure you're safe first, and if there is the opportunity, as I say, to educate someone who is willing to listen, then please do so. But don't get yourself hurt over it. I'm not the best example of this. I do tend to react when I hear things that I shouldn't hear. This week, as I say, the opportunity presented itself because there was a group of 4 people discussing their views about transgender people in a rather loud fashion, mostly being led by one person as usual. there's always a loudmouth that, you know, thinks their view is the only view. Now, of course, everyone's entitled to their own view. I can't say that they're not. They have the right to say what they want, and you have the right to say what you want. And two, if you're in a work-based environment, or really just any professional environment, you are protected by the 2010 Equality Act in this country, and you don't have to be abused by either the people that you work with, or the people that you're working for, or the people that are coming to you to use your services if you work in a service industry of any description. Like I say, you're protected by the 2010 Equality Act, so you do have the right, if it's a workplace environment, to not be abused by staff, customers, or your employer. So it is important that you remember that. And okay, while you might not feel comfortable challenging certain behaviours out in the street, you do have the right to challenge behaviours that make you feel uncomfortable at work and places of a professional environment. This group that was discussing this rather loudly could be overheard by myself and at least 8 other people, and I just felt that her view, particularly her view, was rather narrow-minded, and it was mostly about presentation and visual-based presentation of transgender people. Of course, it was directed mostly male to female, and even she made a comment about, oh, you don't see it the other way. Well, that's not true. There's just as many, it's just they tend to blend in easier than we do, to a certain degree. I know it's no picnic for them either, but she was mostly directing her views at male to female like myself, and she was basically saying that these two people didn't meet her visual standard for what was female, and therefore, you know, their views weren't valid, or their gender identity wasn't valid to her, because one of them had basically only changed their name at this stage. So obviously I don't know who they're talking about, but had only changed their name, and that was basically all the alteration they had. And the place where these two people interact, this person was now being requested that their name be used and the correct pronouns, and that this person was getting upset when their pronouns weren't being used. Now, this is something I have all the time. At work the other day, I deal with hundreds of people, and over the course of a day probably 100 people, and 2 people that day actually used the correct pronouns without fault, and the rest either didn't even try, or would only try after I had heard them mispronounce me so many times that I corrected them. And I know I'm quite generous, or I feel I'm quite generous with the number. I usually wait 3 or 4 times. I try to be patient, because I don't want to be at loggerheads with people all day long over this. So I usually give people a little bit of wiggle room, and then, you know, if it's happening in quick succession all the time, then I do. That's when I normally step in and say, no, can we try using the correct pronouns, or if you can't do my pronouns, just use my name, because that's perfectly acceptable as well. The other thing that this woman was going on about was another transgender person who, again, didn't meet her visual standard. Essentially, by the sounds of things, this transgender person had lower half surgery, and was in fact dressing and using their chosen name and all the rest of it, and presenting as female as much as possible. But again, because this person wasn't meeting her visual standard, and to quote what she said, because they had a vagina installed, now it thinks it's a woman. Well, you can't just judge people based on their visual presentation or their biological presentation, because there are days when a transgender person cannot present the way they wish to. I recently had to go to face laser. Now, I had 2 different appointments at 2 opposite ends of the day, and obviously you have to let the hair grow, and you have to you can't wear makeup, so there was no getting around it. I had to spend the whole day out in public basically not presenting the way I wanted. I usually, because of that, I do my best to conceal my own identity, using hoodies and things like that, and I must admit, on them days I feel uncomfortable with myself. But again, if a transgender person is perfectly comfortable in the way they present, whatever standard that is, it is not up to anyone else to decide what level at which somebody becomes female, and that their presentation isn't a standard to which everyone can be held. Anyway, after biting my tongue and listening to her comments for a while, I was trying to ignore it because obviously I was in a professional environment, so I tried to ignore it. But after a while I did respond. After she said her bits about both these two people, I did turn around and say to her, in the same fashion to which she was speaking to a group of people that could hear, I did turn around and say, well, I'm terribly sorry that we don't all meet your standards, we try our best. She was obviously surprised because she hadn't realised I was there, and the conversation didn't come up again because of my presence. It came up because they were just discussing this person that had started to present with their name at work. She had no idea I was there, and it's probably half the reason why she felt so confident to carry on in the first place. But I did point out to her that we do our best with what we can. The woman behind me was she was happy, actually. I could tell she was happy. She said well done to me afterwards, and said that that I looked very good, which is obviously a nice comment to receive. But obviously, again, visualization isn't everything. It's the degree to which a transgender person presents is up to them. I try to go and present as best as possible, but I don't just do that for other people. I do that for myself. I do it to relieve my own feelings of discomfort with myself. And if I felt more comfortable with myself, then I would probably be able to present with less embellishment, is all I can say, really. But I'm not at that stage yet. After a while, they finished up their conversation. However, they did continue the conversation, just in hushed tones, and I at that point did really want to walk over and say, just because you're saying the same nonsense quieter doesn't make it any less stupid. But obviously I couldn't do that, so I waited for them to finish their conversation. 3 of them left and just the one person remained, and that one person called me over, and I thought that this is going to go one of two ways. Either they're going to kick off and I'm just going to have to walk away from the situation, because obviously, again, professional environment, I need my job, so that's what I've agreed to do, walk away from situations like that. Or we might get somewhere. Fortunately, it ended up being the latter, although he did start off rather defensively of his friends, which I can kind of understand. They're your friends, but I did point out to him that he basically said, instead of calling out people for that, how about you come over and get involved in the conversation. Now, I did point out to him that it wasn't a conversation to which I was invited, and it was also a conversation which was it wasn't a private conversation, as he tried to then imply, because it was a conversation which could be heard by their group and 8 other surrounding people and myself, who was some distance away. So it wasn't a private conversation, it was taking place in public. It wasn't a conversation to which I was invited. And also, I am one person approaching what was 1 female and 3 males. I have no idea what any of their relations are to each other. There was a young youngish person about my age. There was another older chap and a second older chap and a older-ish woman. Now, what I mean by older is 60s, all around about the 60s age, I would have said, with the exception of the younger bloke who was, like I say, probably my age. I have no idea who this lady is. For all I know, that's the younger guy's mum, and the second I say anything, he's going to clock me one, you know, right on the face, and or I'm just going to be opened up to a world of abuse in a professional environment, which isn't going to work, and cause a scene. So I explained that is why I didn't approach the conversation. I just really, it wasn't, what they were doing wasn't having a conversation or even attempting to have a conversation. They were just spewing their views about something to which they didn't have all the facts. It ended up being quite an epic, as I say, 50-minute chat with this person, and I got to go through a lot of things, and I kind of felt like I did the right thing at the end of it, but it's so hard to say. I don't know if I ever got through to him. I hope he does understand more what we go through, and the fact that an individual's level of presentation is entirely up to them, and that their own visual view is not a standard to measure us by. Because you can do the same to any cisgender person as well. You could turn around and look at a cisgender man and say, well, because he doesn't go to the gym and he's not built like a tank, he doesn't meet your standard of a man, and that's not fair. And it's not fair for a transgender woman to be judged because she hasn't, on any given day, she isn't able to present the way she wants to, i.e. with my face laser. Or another example is when I go to the gym. Obviously I'm not going to wear full hair and makeup because it'll be on my towel 10 minutes later, and I can't be taking my wig and weave off and having it washed every 5 minutes, because that's just not how they work. You can't maintain them like that. They're quite delicate and require care, and I wouldn't go to the gym and ruin one. So that's the problem, and people just don't understand. They don't have the facts. They just think that you should be making maximum effort all the time, and that if for whatever reason you don't meet their standard, that you're not valid. Which this is why I said at the beginning of this video, I feel like it's important to educate people that that's not the case, and that a visual standard isn't a good reference to judge someone by, and it isn't even a standard to which the government recognises people by.